Welcome to the Inflection Podcast, where we explore the pivotal moments that have shaped us into who we are today. I am your host, Anebi, and I can't wait to dive into these moments with you. Let's get it. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Inflection Podcast. I'm excited to have you here with me today. The man, the myth, the legend, Tom Derry. It's been a long time coming, man. Thank you for hopping on with me today.
Wow. Yeah, dude. Yeah, honored, blessed, grateful.
So if you know me at all, you know I'm always talking about turning points, inflection points. It's what this podcast is called for a reason. And you, like many people, and maybe more than most, have had a lot of inflection points where in your life, turning points, interesting pivots, and you're man building a legacy and a beautiful story. And it's been awesome to be part of that to a certain degree. And just wanted to bring you on and talk through a few of those inflection points. Should you be willing to share?
Yeah. No, yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. It has been a long time. I feel like we've been talking about it for a few years, maybe, but maybe it hasn't been that long. But stoked to chat for a little bit.
Yeah. So right now you're doing quite a few things related to story. So what the heck is this obsession with story? You have a story partners recruiting company. You have the story labs. You have story app. Go back in time. What's this obsession with story?
Yeah. So it started with probably the largest inflection point of my life was just coming to faith. I don't know what your audience is like, but a big part of my story and a big part of the inflection points of my life are around my relationship to Jesus. And so at that time, as back in 2008, I started a breakfast for guys to come around and share a story about their faith journey and their relationship to God and that kind of stuff. And so that's really where it started. I didn't have this grand vision. Ultimately, I just wanted to hang out with my friends and hear their story and encourage one another. And so fast forward however many years later, 15 years later, it's just morphed into so many things. And it wasn't my design. But it was like this something that was a lot bigger than me, and it kind of culminated around story. I don't know if that answers your question per se, but it was very organic in one, put it one way, or an organic sort of revelation. I didn't know that I was obsessed with story, but it just sort of all the puzzle pieces fell into place, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess this is kind of my thing.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. How does that play into I don't know if I could say your main thing, or one of your main things, mm-hmm. In addition to being a father, husband, right now is the Story Partners recruitment agency, right? What does that look like? Weaving story into the recruiting business.
Right. Yeah. So I started recruiting with a few other friends of mine, and for about 4.5 years was a part of that agency. And so in talking with all these high-level people around the country, whether they're at Google or Facebook or whatever, the top talent was always curious and interested. The thing they were most interested in is, what's the story behind the client that you're bringing to me? For a lot of the top talent, they've kind of reached the apex of their careers, or they get to choose where they're going to go next. You know, they're not
Yeah.
desperate. They're like, yeah, I've done really well where I'm at. I'm doing what I'm doing. Maybe I've got a few notches of career success above me that I can shoot for, but at this stage of their career, they can kind of pick and choose where they're going to go next. And so they always wanted to know what's the impact of the client and what product or service are they working on and how are they making a difference in the world. And so similarly, the client was always interested in the story of the candidates. You know, where have they come from? What did they do? What impact have they made? And so I think that's where the idea behind Story Partners began. So when I set out to start my own agency, it was really story was the center of that. I want to help candidates tell their story to the clients. And I feel like the best recruiters out there are going to be able to catch the vision, the mission, the values of their client and be able to tell that story in a powerful way. It's ultimately a sales role. And so I think, some of my favorite relationships in life are, with guys and people that we can sit around a dinner table, we can sit around a fire or whatever, and hear stories of their lives, and it's just a really enjoyable experience. So I think, it's really applicable in lots of different, avenues of life too. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I remember when you and I finally met up in California in Atascadero, and got to meet in real life and talk. It was very impactful too. Like we had talked online and stuff, but there was just something disarming and amazing about meeting in person and learning more about your story, sharing mine. That was amazing. And that's something I want to be able to capture in my day-to-day life, right? Just seeing that we all are part of a story, whether we like it or not. It's a bigger overarching story with a lot of microcosmic, stories and threads all going through. It's an interesting way to look at life, and you have gotten me thinking a lot more about that, story. And fast forward a little bit, you're also working on the Story app, and that's also intriguing. I want to dive into that. So what was I know you've mentioned the aha moment with stories, getting guys together to share their stories, the testimonies, if you will. How does that, blend into what the heck is Story app? And why are you doing that? And why do you keep doing that?
Yeah. Well, so I kept having those breakfasts every month. I still host those. And there, about 4 or 5 years ago, a guy was sharing a story, and every single time it's so impactful for me and everybody who attends, that even the first year that I did it, I was like, man, my whole church or my whole community, we need to hear each other's stories. We need to know each other. This is like so powerful. And I was constantly trying to figure out how could we scale this, I guess, so that there's more opportunity to hear more stories. It's kind of the thought. And when I started the men's breakfast, I think it was 2008. I think I said it. I think that same year, I Am Second came out. And if you know that ministry or that organization, they basically just record a bunch of stories. They do a lot of stuff now, but they started with just, I think they call them white chair films, 1 or 2 people sitting in a white chair, a couple white chairs, and they just tell these stories. And so for years, I thought maybe that's what I'll do one day, is create some kind of production studio. And so I'll just go around and capture these stories. Well, that's not super scalable unless you're going to create 100 production studios or something. I don't know how that would, but I didn't have any other ideas, and I was just kind of going off the I Am Second thing. So about 5 years ago, I was reinvigorated with this thought, and I started praying about it and talking about it. And as I was telling this idea in very similar words that I just spoke now, people kept responding, "That sounds like an app." And I was like, how does that sound? How does that? I was not connecting the dots at all. And finally, I was just ignoring them, like kind of like, I don't know what you're talking about, and I have no vision for that. But a buddy of mine had told his grandmother about the idea
Oh,
for
wow.
sharing stories and all stuff. And his grandmother doesn't own a smartphone, whatever. But she responded to him and said, "That sounds like an app." And so he was like, "Grandma, how do you even know what an app is? You don't know, you don't have a smartphone, you don't have anything." So when he told me that story, I was like, okay, I just felt like it was like clear at that point. God is trying to tell me this is an app. So then through more prayer, he just started putting all the pieces together of what it would look like. And I'd never prototyped anything, never wireframed anything, but led me to, I bought Mockflow as a service and built out this wireframe. Then one thing led to another. And we just a few months ago launched the MVP. So we've got like the basic shell of what it could be in the App Store now. And we're just trying to figure out like, where do we go from here? How can we make it easy for people to share their stories with each other?
That's amazing. That's an app I would use. And no, it's been awesome seeing that come to fruition, because when we met years ago, I know it was in your heart. You had talked about it. It wasn't fully fleshed out yet. I don't even know. I think this was before you knew for sure it should be an app, right? And it's been awesome just seeing that evolution, all the way to now. Now there's something tangible, an MVP, to further iterate on. So that has been fantastic. Okay, so those are two things: story partners, recruitment, story app, and app to share your story and testimony. And then you have story labs to complete the trinity. Unless you have other story related things in there I don't know about. But how does that connect to all of this? Story labs, for those who don't know, right, is co-working or a couple co-working spaces. So how did that come into the equation for you?
Yeah. So a couple years ago, it was January 21. Well, it was November really. I met a guy named Greg Squires, and he and I started talking about co-working. Well, 2 years prior to that, my wife and I were talking about some kind of community space that people could come together, and we were praying about it and looking at buildings and all this other kind of stuff. And we weren't thinking co-working really. We were thinking more like general store or something. We didn't really know. We just wanted to, encourage community and invest in community. But we didn't have $2 million to buy a building, or we didn't have money to take on, a couple more mortgages. So we just kind of stopped praying, stopped thinking about it. Well, then fast forward a couple years later, meet this guy, Greg, and he's got this heart for co-working, and he wants to move his company, several miles down this road to this neighborhood where I'm at Atascadero. So he's trying to brainstorm how he can do that. And this is still in the middle of the pandemic, really. So he's going around looking at all the buildings and scoping out and talking to the landlords that I had done a year prior. And we get to, December of 2020, and there's this giant empty space, giant empty building on campus of our church that nobody had really used for the past year. And he's like, "What if we did it there?" And I was like, again, like didn't for that. I was like, I don't know, co-working on a church campus, I'm not sure. But he's like, let's just go pitch it to the pastor. So we went and talked to him, and 30 minutes after kind of casting the vision, which was, kind of this place for like-minded people to come together, maybe kingdom-minded entrepreneurs and business owners and workers to sort of collaborate together, maybe even incubate other startups and provide funding, but also bring young people in, high school age, maybe middle school, and sort of build this this community of faith and work, and being able to connect your faith and work. So after hearing that vision, it was probably 30 minutes. He just handed us the keys and was like, "Go for it." So it's
oh my gosh.
Yeah. 2-story building, 10,000 square feet, probably 3,000 on the top, and then 2 multi-purpose rooms and a coffee shop on the bottom. And so over the course of the last 2.5 years or so, a little over 2 years, we've had a lot of people come in. There's all kinds of testimony as those testimonies of like what God's done. We opened after a year here. We opened a second location in Slow, about the same size, a little bit different in look and feel. And then this summer we're supposed to open a third space that's going to be triple the size of our first two.
Amazing.
And so, yeah, it's still evolving. It's still changing. And it's interesting too. I'll say this: about 3 or 4 months in of being in existence, we were shocked. Like this is something God was doing all over the world and all over the country. There was tons of people that had even been doing this for maybe a decade of putting co-working in churches specifically.
Wow.
And yeah, you've got Cohatch, I think, is one of our favorites out of the Cincinnati area. They've got, I think, 15 locations now. But I think if we were to choose somebody that we wanted to aspire to be, Cohatch is probably most on point. Cohatch, yeah, but they're literally, this is happening all over the country to a large degree. There's a really cool tech startup called Church Space that we're in talks with right now about potentially partnering, and it's a bit of a movement, it seems, and so we just found ourselves in the middle of something God was doing, and it was really exciting. I'll say this is the last thing I'll say before letting you ask whatever or taking it in another direction. But we got given the keys to the co-working space. 3 days later, I'm sitting up here by myself in a giant open space. The carpets were destroyed and the walls were all gross and everything else. So it's just me and this desk. And I get this call from somebody that I knew, but I don't know if I'd ever talked to before or whatever. But they were like, "Hey, I hear you're opening a co-working space." And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And they're like, "Do you need like a bunch of office chairs and a bunch of office desks and some printers?" And I was like, yeah, I do. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around, like, are we doing this? And they're like, "Great, I'll deliver them this afternoon." So they brought a trailer of like,
oh my goodness,
office supplies and just filled our co-working space. Like God just like totally provided. And the last detail on that note is 2 months prior to that, I was in a different sort of co-working space, ministry-minded co-working space called Global Sharing. And this guy had this Herman Miller chair, and my back was kind of hurting because I'm not sitting at the computer all day and all this stuff. But I sit in this chair, and it's just like this amazing chair. It feels so good on my back, but it's like $1,000. And so I was like, Lord, I don't want to spend $1,000 on a chair. Not because I don't think it's worth it, but I just have a hard time doing that, you know? I was like, if there's any way that you could provide one of these chairs for me, like that feels impossible. That feels like a silly request, but you know, that'd be great. I'd really appreciate it. So then 2 months later, I get that call like, "Hey, you want a bunch of chairs?" So 8 of those Herman Miller chairs were delivered to me. I was like, oh. I mean, and I didn't even know, it wasn't even on my radar when I prayed that prayer that I would be opening my own co-working space, you know, or anything. But I just prayed that prayer, and then, you know, a couple months later, I get 8. Not just one of those chairs, but 8 of those chairs.
8 of them. Oh my goodness.
So I love telling that story because so cool.
Thank you for sharing that. So what's next for you? What's coming up as you look at the rest of the year and, you know, and the years to come? Are there things you're particularly excited about and you'd like to share?
Like everybody else, I'm super excited about AI.
All right. You're gonna go there. All right.
Well, I mean, yeah, so your podcast is entitled Inflection Points, and we all have inflection points, basically just turning points, you know, pivot points in life. And gosh, the world has just experienced so many over the last couple of years. And, you know, I kind of started this whole journey in recruiting. My recruiting company is basically the revenue generator, you know, in my life. And we've just been it's always a roller coaster. It's always crazy. But over the past 2 years, it has been very high highs and very low lows. We went from 6 months ago having 500,000 recruiting jobs listed on LinkedIn to now like all the recruiters got laid off. And, so it's just crazy up and down. And so, yeah, it has definitely been an inflection point for us. And so what we're finding right now is tons of tech is putting their hiring on hold. And then some are still hiring. And it's just kind of all over the place. For us personally, we have a lot of clients in the social services industry that are reaching out to us. We've got a CEO search with kind of like a foster care and family care and counseling sort of company here in the Central Coast. I'm talking with kind of like a homeless services client and even human trafficking. And so at this inflection point, I'm finding that there's a lot of overlap starting to happen with the Story app and recruiting and Story Labs, because it is all about story and it's about knowing one another. It's about being known and it's about knowing one another. And so I got a million stories I could tell about how we got here. But about 6 weeks ago, I've been praying for, I don't know, a couple of years. I've talked to you personally about maybe even becoming like our tech co-founder, of the Story app. But I just needed, with everything that's happening, I needed a tech. You've kind of been a large tech consultant for us. You built our website. I tell that story often where you jumped on with Hebronsoft and helped us navigate that. I think the AWS issue, or I forget what it was. Maybe it was a Google Maps issue.
Yeah, GCP.
Yeah, and so I've talked to you about it, but there's a guy who I've been friends with for the last 15 years, basically since I got saved. He and I were really good friends, and he's kind of dealt in a lot of bleeding technology over the last several years, from crypto to brain technology to a lot of artificial intelligence. And so he and I went on a trip together 6 weeks ago. Super transformative, incredible story I could tell. But essentially at the end of that trip, I felt impressed to ask him if he'd be interested. And I don't know why I never thought of him before.
Yeah.
But I said, hey man, this is something I've been praying about. If he lives in Spokane, Washington. So I was like, if you'd pray about this or think about this, if this ever is on your heart, I don't know, just something to kind of little seed to plant to see if you'd be interested. And he was like, the answer is yes. And I was like, okay, you mean you're like, yes, you'll pray about it? Like, that seems very aggressive way to say you'll pray about,
Yes.
Like, no, the answer is yes. He's like, yeah, I'll pray about it and all that other stuff, but I'm in. He's like, because the weekend very much, like I got to meet one of the evangelical leaders of Zimbabwe and these multiplication network, like church planning people from all over the world. And he watched me present Story app and present, the idea of story and being known and knowing one another to this group and to these individuals. And so he got to see firsthand like the impact that it could make with individuals. And so I think he was really impressed and really touched and inspired. And so he was like, when I asked him that question, he was just like, dude, I'm in 1,000%. So he took the last 6 weeks basically and just took off. Like he just, he and his wife went to Hawaii, and he just took a break from work. All the while he's sending me tons of resources, but his official today. And so we started brainstorming yesterday. I mean, he's been brainstorming the whole time. He's very heavy-handed on artificial intelligence and all the things that all the tools and resources and application that he wants to put towards the things that we're involved with, story and telling. The other part of recruiting that we do for clients is telling their story.
Yeah.
And I've always telling their story has always kind of been like a 500,000 pound weight, because you got to hire a production crew and you got to do all this stuff and you've got to. I felt it was that important, and we partnered with various different filmmakers. Ben Ferguson is one of those guys, him.
Yeah.
And we had lots of different film partners, But this stuff that Corey's bringing to the table is turning that huge weight and time investment into like a very featherweight thing. And I think AI is doing that across the board, right? For everyone. It's taking what took a long time and a lot of effort and putting it into something that's a lot lighter weight. And so that's one of the reasons everybody's so excited about it. But that makes me really excited just because our time is so short, and we do want to serve. We want to empower people to tell their story. And it does feel like a very large lift. And so having a tool like AI to come in and be able to make it that much more tangible and easy is pretty exciting, and not something that before he joined, I wasn't even thinking about that. To be honest, like I had no vision for how AI could be applied. I knew it was this incredible tool, but he comes in and he's just able to see it all, and then he gives me those nuggets, and I'm just able to, now my dreaming visionary brain is just like
rocket launch.
So yeah, so
that is pretty cool.
Big inflection point the last couple of days, just sort of dreaming about new possibilities and where we can go. So
yeah, that is amazing, Tom. Thank you so much for sharing that. What would you leave with those who might be on a precipice, maybe at the cusp of a breakthrough inflection point? They don't know if could be starting a business, could be a new career, could be fill in the blank, right? Thinking through that. You've had a lot of those over the years, but what advice would you give to such a person who's listening to this?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the old adage, I don't know how you say that, the old saying that it's the night is darkest right before the dawn. And I think back to there's so many different inflection points, but and I think I've gotten into a rhythm now where it's like, if things feel dark, I kind of get curious and kind of excited, because I'm like, and that's definitely defined this season, where the world is crazy and the market is crazy and all this stuff. I've just been excited, like, okay, a lot of this is way outside of my control. It feels on paper, it looks like things are bad, but just excited to see kind of what comes out of it and how the Lord's going to show up. And I don't know what your audience, I hate to lean too hard into scripture when I don't know who my audience is necessarily, but you can look over scripture too, right? Like, you think of Red Sea moment, you think of Abraham and Isaac moment, you think of like all these moments where it feels like it's so dark. Even the cross itself, like the guy's dead and he's inside a tomb. Like, it doesn't get much darker than that for the world, and even darkness came over the world. But man, that third day, like, it was just so there's all these moments. So if you're about to receive a breakthrough, you're probably in a dark spot. Don't despair, and get curious, get excited. I think it's really easy for me, as somebody who believes in a rescuer, a savior, a provider that's divine and bigger. So a lot of that, what I just said, will apply for people of faith. But even if you're not a person of faith, I think that the concept still applies. I think the temptation in those moments are to be super stressed, to strive super hard, to make something happen, and all these other things. And gratitude is one of the first things to roll out. It's more like the world's falling apart and I'm fearful and I'm scared and I'm scrambling. But like, at each inflection point, I'm looking back, and the harder I leaned into gratitude, man, it was because what would happen is, as soon as that light came in, right, and revealed and came into the darkness, I would look back on the previous season and be like, oh man, there was so much I had to be grateful for. There's so much good that was happening. I was always afraid to celebrate, or I couldn't celebrate, or I didn't let myself go there because that looked like everything was falling apart. But then as soon as you get relief from that, you look back. So So now I think there's been sort of this organic ability to just really be grateful in all seasons and just be like whatever it looks like on paper, you're just like, man, I can be really, really thankful for everything that's happening. And that sounds, perspective. And it sounds cliche. I think it sounds like a very common message that you hear in the world. But when you experience it and walk it, it's like, wow, no wonder that's such a common theme, because it's so good and it feels so good to experience that. There's never a moment in life that you can't just experience gratitude, experience thanksgiving, and really joy. So those are the first things that come to mind. Hopefully that's helpful. And
that is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those things. I really appreciate it, and I resonate with it. There have been times during the past where certain things happen, you're anxious, anxiety reading, and you go through it and you realize, why was I so worried about that? And but again, that's the natural inclination, and it takes a lot of retraining of our minds to not go there. As people of faith, like you said, it's a lot easier, I feel like, but still not easy. It's easier, but it takes practice to get to that point where things hit the fan, you're in the middle of the fire, and yet you can say, I am grateful and appreciative for all that has happened so far. For me too, something I look at tied to inflection points is past, present, and future. That's a theme that if you start paying attention in life, you realize the past, the present, and the future, there's this weird interplay between all those three at every time. In the present, the future is touching the past, connected by the present. And many times when we are anxious, it's usually future focus. Some outcome you want to happen and you think won't happen, or an outcome you don't want that you think will happen to you. Or depression, you're looking back at what has happened. You can't change it, but you're depressed about what has happened. But those two could really screw up the present really bad. Right. And that's something that I try to be aware of. A good friend of mine, Nima, mentioned that he does time stamping. So when he has a thought, whether it's melancholic, depressive or anxious, he tries to time stamp it to figure out, where is this coming from? Is this future oriented and past oriented? And to be aware of it, to address it appropriately. But that's what this one thing makes me think of. But hey, man, it's always a pleasure, Tom, chatting with you, and I'm glad we finally got you on the Inflection podcast. And thank you so much for obliging my request to hop on.
You bet. There's one other thing I could share if you've got a minute or two, if you want me to.
Please.
About what's been most helpful in this current inflection point for me.
Yes, sir.
It's another spiritual application that really won't hit home for anybody who doesn't have spiritual discernment. Is that okay? I don't know.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So in terms of, I love what you said about the past, present, and future. I think that's super helpful, where it's like, am I worried? Am I depressed about the past, something that I can't change or affect? Or am I worried about the future, something that I can't change either, or something like that? I love that. And then for me personally, a lot of times if I'm anxious or not thankful, not grateful, depressed, all those things, a lot of times it comes down to my own value, my own self-worth. Like, this isn't working out because I'm a failure, or that didn't work out because I screwed it up. And so a lot of times for me, I'll kind of go inward that way. And what's allowed me in this season to experience gratitude to probably the highest level I ever have, in this moment of great uncertainty, was a concept that I've heard for my entire life, a concept that I've talked about a lot, that a lot of people, especially in the faith circles, are familiar with. And it's this, that our value is summed up in the blood of Jesus. Like, you're valuable because this guy who happened to be God's son and who happened to create the entire world, like, shed his blood, like gave his blood for you. And that's how much value you have. And there's nothing that can separate you from that value, from that love that he expresses for you, to the degree that you can even boast in your weakness. Like the Apostle Paul in the Bible says that he boasts of his weakness, that the power of Christ might rest on him. And so in this season, and when things fall apart, a lot of times I'll look at myself and go, if only I were different in X, Y, and Z way, then my situation would be better. Versus like, God's in control of my situation, and this has nothing to do with my value, or it's all about the blood of Christ. Leaning super headlong into that concept has blown the roof off of joy and God.
Wow.
It literally, it feels like you feel like you just put on a suit of invincibility. And so
I need that suit.
It's pretty amazing. And there's a song by Emmy Rose called The Blood. And it talks about if you've ever wanted perfection and holiness and righteousness, it's all about the blood, and it's never been about performance. It's never been about this, that, and the other. And so that's been a little bit of a mantra for me as well. And it's just been like, yeah, it's been pretty powerful. So that's the last thing I wanted to share kind of on that, that idea of inflection and how you kind of are able to achieve that joy. It's so.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one that I want to listen to this episode again to hear you say that. So I don't forget. But hey, man, thank you so much for hopping on and sharing with us today. And yeah, hopefully we can work on a lot more projects and stuff. It's always amazing working with you. And yeah, you exude that joy that you talk about. I can attest to that, and gratitude. And yeah, it's awesome to be around you. So thanks, man.
Man, dude, Anebi, mad love for you, brother, and just super, super grateful for how you show up in the world, the way that you show up for your brothers and the people around you and your community. Watching you from afar, it's amazing. Even just this podcast, just giving people a chance and an opportunity to share their life, share their story, and bless others with that is huge. And super grateful for you, man.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.